So welcome everybody and welcome to the RSC's Igniting Innovation event. So I'm Helen Payne, I'm Chief Executive of the Royal Society of Chemistry, and I'm so glad you could all join us today. So this is a truly hybrid event. We have an audience live in Burlington House. So I'm currently in Burlington House in the heart of London in our beautiful library, although I realise if you're on screen you won't quite be able to see that. But we have an audience in front of me, and you're very welcome to the audience joining me here and now, and also to our Zoom audience. So I know we have very many people who have joined us online, and this does make our event accessible to people around the UK and beyond. This event is also being filmed and will be available online afterwards, so if you do need to drop off the call at any point, feel free to check in the event later on. And if you want to recap on any of the conversations, the questions, presentations, then you'll be able to do that as well. So our aim today is to start a conversation on how we can support deep tech chemistry SMEs to fulfill their true potential, and so that we can all contribute to building an innovation nation and to catalyse the forming of partnerships to make this happen. Now, chemistry-led innovation is part of the future economy and a healthier, more sustainable world. And we are proud to have supported chemistry SMEs now for nearly a decade. And that is a really important part of the Royal Society of Chemistry's work, and of course, such an important part of chemistry itself. So with the development of the government's innovation strategy and our knowledge of SMEs, we were inspired to commission new research on the role of deep tech chemistry SMEs. And we wanted to understand more about their social, economic and environmental contribution, their role as innovators, what hinders and what helps them, and what government, public sector funders and others in the ecosystem supporting these companies, including the RSC, can do to help. So we are launching our event today, and we hope to work with many of you to support deep tech chemistry. So to talk more widely about the key findings and the actions that we will take, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of experts, and we will be hearing from them about their reaction to the report and its findings, and there will be an opportunity for questions. So if you're joining us online, please do use the chat function on Zoom to enter your questions. We'll monitor those and hopefully answer as many as we can as we go through the session today. And if you're in Burlington House, please raise your hand and we will let you have a roaming mic so you too can engage in the conversation. And we will try to get through as many questions as we can. So with me in person here at Burlington House are Professor Steve Roper on my right, Director of Enterprise Research Centre. Steve has consulted on innovation and enterprise policy for a wide range of organisations, and he has led on this research. So you're very welcome to join us today, Steve. Thank you. And on my left, I have my colleague, Tanya Sheridan, who is Head of Policy and Evidence at the Royal Society of Chemistry. And Tanya has been instrumental to bringing this report to fruition. And joining me virtually on screen in front of me, I have Dr. Jo Slaughter-Newson, a Principal IQ Capital. Jo specialises in investment execution and portfolio management across deep technology sectors. So welcome, Jo. And Dr. Giovanni Laudisio, who is CEO of Nature Beads, a startup company which addresses microplastic pollution, a global problem, as we all know, which affects life on land and also life below water. And Giovanni was one of the entrepreneurs who agreed to be interviewed for this research. And I want to just thank Giovanni and also all the interviewees for their input. And we also have Paul Mason, who is one of our own fellows. He is Director of Innovate UK, and Paul has had responsibility for Innovate UK's corporate strategy and the plan for action for UK business innovation and programmes that supports its development and implementation. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and I'm very much looking forward to all of your contributions and certainly to the questions that will be asked later. Now, unfortunately, we had hoped that George Freeman, the Minister for Science, Research and Innovation, would be either joining us in person today or would have been able to record a short speech for us. But he's been called away to other urgent meetings, so he's not able to join us. But I know that he will be reading our report and also commenting on the research findings. So if we hear anything more from the Minister, then we'll certainly share that with all of you who are present today. So last year, the Royal Society of Chemistry commissioned the Enterprise Research Centre the UK's leading centre of excellence for research into the growth, innovation and productivity of small and medium-sized enterprises, to carry out a study specifically focusing on deep tech SMEs. The research highlighted the challenges, barriers and unique contribution of deep tech chemistry SMEs, and that chemistry, as we all know, underpins many new technologies in the field as diverse as energy and environment technologies, advanced materials and bioinformatics and genomics. It also shows that these SMEs face a range of challenges, and some which are quite specific to chemistry and many shared with other deep tech sectors. So I'm delighted that Steve Roper, who led on this report, will now take us through a summary of the findings. So Steve, over to you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Afternoon, everyone, both in the room and online. I suppose the good part about George Freeman not being here is I have twice as long to speak, which may or may not be a good thing depending on how you think about it. But I will be able to go a little bit more slowly through some of the findings of the report anyway, so that may be to our advantage. This work was commissioned by the RSC from the Enterprise Research Centre, which is an ESRC-funded research centre, as Helen said, with a focus on small and medium enterprises. And the project was led by me, but undertaken in collaboration with Ian Drummond, Carol Stansfield and Joe Turner, one of our research staff at Warwick. Thank you. I guess the aim of this research, as Helen has already said, was really to assess how UK government and other support organisations across both the public and private sectors can best help deep tech chemistry SMEs to maximise the social and economic value of their innovation. And in particular, perhaps to contribute to the kind of innovation missions that were central to the innovation strategy document published last year. The study consisted of a number of different elements. The first was a review of existing policy arrangements which might support deep tech chemistry firms in the UK and internationally. And some key informant interviews to give us a little bit of a scoping view of what the sector and the challenges might be. We then went on to a second phase of the project, which was 29 in-depth interviews with a group of chemistry deep tech SMEs and some support organisations. And it's those interviews, those 29 interviews, which really form the core of what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the project. They were scattered across various domains where chemistry forms an important foundational technology or discipline. And the final element of the project was the development of a range of policy options, which is what I'll talk about at the end of what I want to say, which we then tested with a group of stakeholders, and I guess that we came to a reasonable sense of consensus about what kinds of policy priorities there should be around supporting deep tech chemistry SMEs. So next slide, please. I guess that when we started this project and Tanya gave us this deep tech challenge, what RSC didn't give us was a definition of deep tech, and partly that's because there isn't really an agreed sort of definition. So we were forced to think a little bit about this, and I guess that for the purposes of this study, we're thinking about deep tech as having three deep tech firms, deep tech technologies as having three attributes. The first is that the technologies can have a disruptive impact on markets and technologies. So these are radical innovations that these technologies might stimulate. Very often these are technologies or technical developments that take a long time to reach market. And so in some of the cases that we were talking about, some of the SMEs, they've been working on these technologies for 10 and 15 years, and we're only just beginning to get to the point of actually turning those into a marketable proposition. And of course, because of the length of that time, that delivery time, that development time, these technologies are often very expensive to develop. They often require a substantial amount of capital, and that's also something which was a recurrent theme in the conversations that we were having. Key thing here, I think, for us was that these firms will be the firms which are developing the technologies which will be the foundation for the new markets and the new activities that we need to solve these global problems like net zero, single-use plastics, and many of the other challenges, global challenges that we face. I guess this kind of importance of these deep tech firms was quite strongly reflected in the innovation strategy. I've put a couple of quotes from the innovation strategy on the screen. We don't necessarily need to read these, but these emphasize the critical role that deep tech firms play or might play in achieving the global missions that we have through the innovation strategy, recognises that the UK is better at some elements of this development from lab to innovation than it is at others, and commits really to supporting deep tech firms as part of this mission-driven innovation going forward. Next slide, please. And one of the things we came to realise, I think, as we went on with this project, was that there was a rather unique rationale potentially for supporting deep tech chemistry firms, and perhaps deep tech firms in other technologies too, or other disciplines too, because of this potential, because of the potential social benefits of the technologies that they develop. When we think about policy, and for my sins, I spend rather too much time of part of my life thinking about policy rationales. We often think about it in terms of market failure, and if you have a conversation with Treasury, it will always be around, well, what's the market failure that might underpin that intervention? I think the argument here is that market failures are not all the same. That some market failures are actually rather trivial in terms of their impact. Whereas other market failures, and particularly those perhaps where it's around radical technologies which might change the world, if those technologies do not come to market because of market failures, then that impact could be absolutely enormous and have very significant implications. So where there are these very significant social or economic challenges, and they're very evident in the grand challenges, there may well be a very special case for supporting the firms that may enable us to achieve those very large social benefits. So here we think, in terms of these deep tech firms, that the rationale for intervention is strongest and perhaps creates a special case type of argument for these particular types of companies, simply because of the extent of the potential benefits that their new discoveries might actually bring. So it's an open question, I think, but one that we found very convincing in the study, which was this idea of a special case for deep tech science companies, and particularly chemistry, perhaps, as a foundational discipline for many of the other discoveries that might be made. So let's go on, Katie, please. So I talked already a little bit about the nature of the deep tech journey. This is a rather straight road in the picture, but of course that's not the way it works with most deep tech chemistry firms. I guess this is Arizona or Utah or somewhere. Somebody maybe recognised the rocks in the background of the picture. But very often, many of the firms that we interviewed described a very long, often very difficult, often very challenging development path, during which time the leaders of those firms had to make some very difficult choices. Whether to carry on was often one of the key ones, or whether to actually go back to being an academic or doing something else in life. Trying to identify the markets for the products being developed and where those technologies should be commercialised. Around the management and leadership of the group that was developing and taking to market those technologies. Around how to finance that, and how to change that mix of finance as the project moved from lab towards market. And then also to think about manufacturing or licensing and whether that was something that they wanted to take on. And there's a range of factors which limit the choices that the firms were making. Next slide, please. Some of these were classic market failures, lack of property or available facilities, lack of capital, particularly around equity, some issues around information. And these often were around the difficulty of communicating between the firm and its investors about the potential value of the technology that was being developed. Many of the firms said that the investor community often did not understand or did not see the very significant potential of the developments that they were making. One could argue whether that's a communication problem on both sides, but that was very much the view of the firms. And then there were a series of sort of internal and ecosystem factors which also constrained the choices that firms were able to make on this journey to innovation. Things around management and leadership were critical. We didn't hear very much about technical skills, but we did hear quite a lot about management and leadership skills. It was often said to us that the existing grant support system in the UK is not necessarily fit for purpose when you have these very long development timelines. There were spatial issues that came across for firms, particularly outside the Golden Triangle, with access to premises and access to markets sometimes. And many firms felt that they would have benefited from more support around IP, protection and understanding how to actually go about protecting that IP. Some firms felt that they weren't particularly well served by the universities to which they were often linked. So, 3 final slides just to sort of talk about a little bit about some of the policy implications of what we found. And I think it's fair to say that what I focused on here and what we focused on in the report was pretty much a sort of consensus view from across the firms and the stakeholders that we actually involved in the study. So what you're getting here is not one firm's view. What you're getting here is a pretty unified consensus from the different partners that we talked to about what they saw as important as a group in terms of taking this forward. So the first one was around developing the supportive ecosystem. There was a feeling that there may well be gaps in the provision of facilities to enable these firms to scale in particular. So that raised a question about, well, are there adequate facilities across the country to enable these firms to scale? Is it not so much a question of availability, but also understanding of the firms about what is available and where it is? So there's potentially a bit of a job here around mapping the available facilities and potentially also helping firms to understand, signposting them to existing facilities. There was some questions about whether, just on the technical side, the infrastructure was sufficient on the business development side as well. So do we need more incubators, accelerators that actually have an understanding of the deep tech pathway across the country? There was a question about that. And it's reassuring, I think, that Bayes and colleagues are undertaking a renewed exercise to update the Nesta study from 2017, I think, to look at the UK's incubator and accelerator provision at the moment. That's ongoing, I think, but should be reporting, I think, probably before the summer. So again, that may help us address some of these issues. And again, there was a sense in which, as I said already, some of the advice that the firms felt they were receiving around intellectual property was not always as strong as it might be. One firm, for example, had to go to Germany to get advice on intellectual property. That should not be necessary, I think, in any sensible kind of ecosystem. Let's go on, Katie, please. So access to capital was seen as a kind of critical issue. This had various dimensions to it. Both in terms of access to private equity, but also to the public sector finance. Many of the firms that we'd benefit, in fact, I think almost all of them, had actually had some support from Innovate UK in the early stages of their development. Some were still benefiting from Innovate UK grants or other UKRI support. So that was clearly something that they were doing, but there was a challenge to Innovate UK, I think, particularly, and Paul and I have discussed this with Tanya already, about some of the processes through which Innovate UK grants are actually approved. Some questions about whether the process was suitable and the kind of the timescale and the milestones that are involved in Innovate UK grants actually fit with the sort of long development time paths of deep tech firms. Some of the firms were very concerned about the lack of proof of concept funding. 50k, 30k, just to get something over the first hurdle. Angel funding, particularly outside of the Golden Triangle, was felt to be difficult by many companies. And then there was an equity gap, perhaps, that firms were seeing, particularly for scaling up to a sort of test and manufacturing scale. If you follow the line of argument here, issues around proof of concept, issues around angel funding, which may be the first stage after a proof of concept, and then issues around an equity gap for scaling. It does seem as if all the way through these rather long development paths, these firms were reporting different sort of financing difficulties. So I think it's quite a lot of work for us to do still on ensuring that there is a kind of consistent funding support for deep tech firms as they move to market through the pipeline, and particularly perhaps outside the southeast of England. And the final slide is just around strengthening leadership and networks. All of these firms pretty well were led by scientists. Some of them were brilliant managers and some of them were brilliant leaders, not all of them. And so they were looking to try to build teams around them with that sort of business and commercial understanding to try and help them commercialize their products and technologies effectively. And so that was a bit of a challenge for these companies, that sort of team building. And I guess that when we talk to firms about, well, what do you want? The last thing that they said they wanted was management training. They didn't feel that was very helpful, particularly. The off-the-shelf management training was going to be particularly useful. What they either wanted was something which was very bespoke, almost developmental for them and their team, or on the other side, some sort of networking kind of arrangements that they could link with other firms which were facing similar challenges, so they could learn from one another. Another kind of aspect to this was perhaps linking somehow skill management and leadership development to grant aid. One idea was perhaps to score, to give people who went on a training course some sort of premium in terms of grant scoring, grant applications, may be difficult. But to align some sort of management and development training, a little bit like Innovate are doing now, with some of the grants, seemed to be a very logical next step. And finally, a number of the companies, not quite put it in these terms, but talked about their ability to take on board new technologies and assimilate those within the firm. And in academic speak, absorptive capacity, develop their absorptive capacity. They weren't talking about this in any very concrete sense, but one of the options here was to strengthen, did seem to be to strengthen networking across these firms. And I think in this kind of context, it's quite sad that something like the Bayes peer networking program has been ended now, because I think that would have been a nice mechanism for actually boosting this kind of policy learning. So let me stop there and say I do hope this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end, because my sense coming out of this has been that these firms are and will play a critical role in these grand challenges. And I think it's behoven on all of us to try and support them as best we can.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you for your presentation, but also for the extremely helpful insights from the research and also from the report, because I think you make us stop and really appreciate the game-changing nature of these SMEs and these companies and the innovative ideas that we're bringing to fruition. But also especially the particular challenges they face within the kind of chemistry innovation. And I know there are many SMEs who these challenges will kind of align to, and many SMEs who will recognise these very familiar challenges. Thank you also very much for setting out some of the findings, but also thinking ahead to what some of the solutions might be. Now, the RSC has set out its own action plan as part of the report, and Tanya is going to talk through those towards the end of our session today. But first, I'm going to move on to the panel and hear from panel members their own reflections and thoughts on the research. And I'm sure during the conversation, the discussion that we have, we'll hear more from Steve, but also from the panel members as well. So if I can reintroduce our three panel members who are joining us virtually today. So again, Jo Slaughter-Newson from IQ Capital, Giovanni Laudisio from CEO Nature Beads, and Paul Mason from the Director of Innovate UK. So first of all, I'm just going to ask each of you, Jo, Giovanna and Paul, just to give your own reflections on the research that you've heard from Steve. So just slightly random order, but if I can ask for Paul, then Jo, then Giovanna, that'd be fantastic. So Paul, can I come to you first?
Of course, yes. Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to join this session today. So I could probably talk for an hour, so I'm going to try and be fairly brief. I mean, overall impressions, I think it's a great report. It's good to see that it's produced. I think a lot of the messages would resonate with us, do resonate with us. It's a sector that has our attention, 500,000 jobs and nearly 60 billion in exports. I mean, it's a really important sector for us, and we do care about it. I like the title, Igniting Innovation. I spent 25 years in the chemical industry myself, including running a factory for several years. We had rather a large amount of acetone with hundreds of tons in tanks and 20-ton wagons coming in. And anybody who uses the word igniting gets my immediate attention. So no, I think it's very, very good. I mean, I think on the access to finance side, I think we think our grants and increasingly our loans are an important part of that landscape. I think the points you've made about the process and whether they really work for slower clock speed innovations is an interesting one. It'd be good to look and think about that. We have shown flex in the past. For example, one of the programs I started was our agricultural program, and we used to run 5-year grants to get enough number of seasons, growing seasons in, so that if you had some weird weather for a year or two, you could still work out whether something was doing you any good. So we have shown when there's a case that we're able to flex the process. I don't know what capacity we would have now to do that, but in the past we've done that. So I think those are important things. Our loans, that's quite late stage, but of course, SMEs, if they're going to grow, have to get to late stage. We about 3 or 4% of our loans portfolio is in that space, and we can talk a little bit more about that. And there are a number of companies that we're funding either through grants or through through loans. I think if you look at the way the world is changing as we move forward, there is almost nothing that happens that affects the life of human beings or anybody else who lives on this planet that doesn't involve chemistry. And there are almost no challenges, whether they're to do with our built environment, the ability to move, the ability to feed ourselves, the ability to generate energy, the ability to deliver healthcare, the sorts of things in our future economy era. There's almost none of those where chemistry isn't relevant. I mean, in fact, within the last 2 or 3 weeks, New Scientist had a wonderful front cover. It sort of said chemistry to save the world. And that kind of sums up the importance of it. I think that was really good to see that and timely. I think the facilities thing is interesting, clearly important. One of the things we found slightly difficult in that space is that the variety of what you need is so vast. Do you need electrical zoning? Don't you need electrical zoning? Are you handling things that are kind of S1 poisons or not S1 poisons? What sorts of volumes are you talking about? What kind of pressures do you need? What sort of temperatures do you need? What are your heat and mass transfer problems? All of those sorts of things. And that can be very, very, very varied across the sector. So knowing exactly what should be provided for is quite hard, really. Let alone different ways of separating the product from any media solvents or aqueous environments or whatever in IBs particularly. So I think that's quite a difficult problem, although I recognize that the problem is real. I think the idea of writing a list of where stuff is that you might get access to, I think that's a really great idea to start with. Steve mentioned it, Innovate UK Edge. So for all of our grant recipients now, we offer them exposure to bespoke specialist innovation specialists that work with the management team. So we have a 2-track approach to engagement with companies we're funding. One is the grant and through the monitoring office to make sure the grant is being properly deployed. And then on the other side, we work with the management team of the company to help them work out how to grow their organization. So the two things go side by side. One is about the company, the other is about the grant and the project. And that seems to be working very well for us. We've had very good feedback. And in fact, we're through the advisors from the Intellectual Property Office, we're making IP advice available through those specialists for all of those companies that we're supporting. So that is clearly a thing. Not great to hear that you have to go to Germany for that, but hopefully that will get better in the future. Networking is absolutely key. Those in the room will know that my colleague Pete Clark is with you. He's the head of chemistry and IB programs at the Knowledge Transfer Network for us. So do reach out for him. He's in the room. I think I better stop there, but just to summarize, it's a great report. We really welcome it. We value the work that the RSC does that they've done with us over many years, and it would be great to continue that work and to make it deeper as we move forward. So it'd be really great to be involved in more conversations, as Steve said, the beginning of a conversation, not the end of it today. So yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Paul, for sharing your thoughts. And I think chemistry saves the world is a scenario that we can all sign up to and look out for, as all the work that we do, whether it be at the Royal Society of Chemistry or through all the SMEs that we're engaging with, it's such an important area for solving those big global challenges. Thank you. I'm going to ask Jo now just to share her thoughts.
Thanks so much, and great to be with you today at this hybrid event. I definitely want to start by reiterating again just how important this whole area is and how important it is to be supporting SMEs in this sector. The chemistry deep tech SMEs really are involved in so many game-changing industries and solving so many of the grand challenges. It's really the SMEs particularly that really is the bedrock of innovation. So thinking about even from our own investment portfolio, we've got companies like Niobolt involved in fast charge batteries for the energy transition, Paragraph creating graphene for efficient electronics and sensing, to GoMix, sort of predictive medicine and super early diagnostics. And it's just incredible the impact that really could come to pass from some of these companies. So fantastic just to start again, like Paul, just to sort of reiterate the importance of all of this. So it's fantastic that this project the research has been commissioned, and that hopefully the policy considerations really will have an impact here. So on some of the specifics of the report, I think one particular area of interest for me is the skills and the training. So we all know how important the STEM subject training is, and that wasn't highlighted because there is so much of an emphasis that goes into STEM skills and training for now, but it's really those other skills, the management, business skills. I think just a whole creating sort of well-rounded managers and scientists that can actually be the right operators to deliver some of these really difficult innovations. Back to the image of the straight road, wherever it was in the States, probably, that the route for these companies is not linear. They're really complicated journeys. There have to be tough strategic choices, and they're not going to be solved by having really excellent scientists that have a quick course in generic management training. Actually, at the base of it is we need to make sure that our whole education system really fosters creativity and broad thinking and wide experience. So even back to the sort of the emphasis of the arts in our school system, that can't be helping when actually creativity and broad thinking is so important alongside science skills to really skill up our SMEs. And then obviously the access to finance is very pertinent for me, being part of a venture capital fund that invests in early stage deep tech companies across chemistry and other sectors. I think to be fair, there is quite a lot of funding available, but maybe it's the difficulty is more in finding the right finance for the right company. And as sort of hinted a little bit in the presentation, actually, part of that is the company's own abilities to really translate what they do and why it matters, you know, really getting to the so what, getting that clear articulation of both their innovation and also their value proposition. But some of it is not finding the right investment partners for them. And it's so important that they do find an investor that really understands their sector, understands the science, the limitations and the opportunities of what they're trying to do, and that can also be aligned to the same timelines, you know, understanding that these kinds of companies do take a long time compared to, you know, basic digital apps or something. So it's understanding who those sort of deep tech focused investors really are. And then getting that right investor can be an excellent way to really help the companies to connect in to industries and also to their peers. So a lot of investors like IQ Capital have strong networks of our portfolio company CEOs, and they can support each other, share best practice, which could be a really important part as well. And then maybe just to finish, I think you know, it's fantastic that we're taking a step back and looking at the whole ecosystem for financing, because taking projects often from an academic beginning all the way to commercial success requires many different types of funding within the universities, translation funding, Innovate UK, and then private financing. All need to work together, and we need to make sure that that there aren't gaps in between them and that we all sort of closely collaborate.
Thank you very much, Jo. That was incredibly helpful. And thank you so much also for highlighting, again, the importance of investment, not only in the innovation, but also in the business skills that are necessary to enable the success over a long period of time of the SMEs, who are going to certainly be delivering on some phenomenal initiatives that are really going to help the world. Thank you so much, Jo. And I'm going to come now to Giovanna for her thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to participate in this panel. I was really pleased also to be interviewed, to share my experience, because I think it's really important, you know, this type of studies that highlight the challenges that we as entrepreneurs we have to face, and every further help. I would like to say that I think in UK we have already a lot of help as entrepreneurs, but any further help that would make our journey a little bit less stressful is really appreciated. I made some point based on, you know, the presentation of the key points and the discussion. I think areas where there is, you know, there could be some help in terms of funding. For example, as a CEO of NaturalBids, I was lucky because my two co-founders are two professors at the university, and they had a good knowledge on all the different type of funding available. For example, the lack of funding for proof of concept was mentioned, but actually my two co-founders applied for the IAA account, which probably is not available to everyone, because my understanding is for people who have received EPSRC funding, but I'm sure that perhaps there are other type of funding. So I think it's important to have information on all types of funding that entrepreneurs can access to. So if there is some kind of database, or it would be helpful to have. I'm not sure I'm aware of all the funding. I know well, as I was mentioning before to Paul, the Innovate UK funding and perhaps other regional funding, but I'm sure that there are other sources of funding that we could access. So this could be helpful. In terms of space, I think here in the Southwest where we're based, I know that in the last few years there has been an improvement in terms of availability of labs, but I completely agree with Paul. It's very difficult to understand the type of laboratory, of the type of space we need. So, for example, NaturalBids is looking for space for scale up. So it is more like industrial than laboratory. We've been really lucky, and we appreciate the support we received from the University of Bath that allowed us to stay. It's now already 3 years that we're based at the university. So my but there is a real need of knowing the type of spaces that are available in different regions. And when I try to contact regional offices, not much information was available. I'm sure that, for example, there could be some underused capacity in companies. For example, before NatureBids, I worked in DuPont. We had a space at the Bristol Business Park, and half of our building was actually empty at the time. For a period, it was rented to a laboratory of the University of West of England. So I was always wondering, perhaps there are other chemical industries in the area that have overcapacity that could be rented to startups. So this is not an information that is available, and I think it would be really helpful because it's a space that is already set for laboratory use. And then as the last thing I would say, it would be helpful also to have information on investors, especially, I don't want to say all over the world, but local investors and their area of specialization, because in a way I had to dig this information from Google or from contact or participating to events. So it is really a lot of work, and I know that there are databases that are by subscription, but perhaps some, let's say, free list of investors would be helpful, especially for first early stage entrepreneur who don't have a lot of funding.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, and thank you so much for just sharing also your insights. I think it's so important. It really does highlight what you've just expressed, the importance of listening directly to SMEs in terms of the challenges that you face, but also the opportunities for putting solutions in place and in supporting you. And I hope very much that some of the action points that will come from the report will really address those very points that you've raised. I'd also just say to the audience that if you have a chance to look at Giovanna's company's NatureBeads online, the case study that we have provided, then it's a phenomenal example of deep tech SME and the opportunities that are there with the incredible thinking that's gone into the organisation. So thank you very much, Giovanna, for sharing your thoughts. Okay, we're now going to move on to some questions. There's an opportunity for both those of you who are joining us online to ask your questions via the chat, and those of you who are joining us in Bennington House to raise your hand. I'm going to ask my colleague Tanya to support us on asking the questions and just ensuring we can direct to the right member of our panel to get your thoughts as well. I suggest that we take it in turns from an audience in the room and also online. So I'll come to Tanya first to ask the first question.
The first question that we have is from the online audience, and Moni has asked whether industry is 100% prominent in the survey. And so I think this is about a question about Industry 100 and about the study. Please do add to the chat or to the questions, but maybe Steve, did you want to talk about the way that the companies are covered in the study?
Yes, this was a fairly small scale sort of qualitative, more in-depth rather than representative type of exercise, I think, although there was a fair degree of kind of cross-checking of kind of findings as we went along through the study. And the firms were sort of selected as trying to cover the different main areas of chemistry technologies, and also to cover some firms in the establishing phase, in a sense, pre-revenue phase, and then also some firms that were fairly early to market. And most of them were all of them were deep tech firms, in the sense that they weren't CROs. They weren't multiple product firms. They were fairly early stages, very much driven by chemistry IP. So that was really the kind of core firms that we were focusing on in the project here. And I think that we were quite happy that by the time we'd finished talking to around 25 or 30 of these, we had a pretty good understanding of what the key challenges were, and also kind of got to this kind of point of saturation where we weren't hearing very much new from those kind of companies.
Thank you very much, Steve. I don't know if any of the other panelists wanted to put anything on, add to that answer. Paul.
It's only a very short comment, which is that I think the messages we're hearing back from Steve and the team are very consistent with our own experience on the ground. And I think if the sample was massively unrepresentative or distorted in some way, we might hear messages that just seem to make no sense. So, I mean, 29 companies isn't, 200 companies, but it's probably enough to get the level of messaging that's in the report. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say, really.
Thank you very much, Paul. Okay, if we can come to our next question, I'm going to ask if anybody in the room, Ryan.
Hello, Ryan Mercer from the Science Council. I was wondering if this report had been conducted 10 or 20 years ago, do you think it would have had substantively different conclusions, or do you feel like how do you think things have moved over time, if there's any sense of that from the panel?
That's a very good question, Ryan. So do we believe if it was conducted 10 or 20 years ago, whether the conclusions would have been different, or would they have been similar to what we've learned today? Again, who is anybody on the panel want to offer an answer to that one?
I think this is Paul's territory, because Paul was working in the sector 20 years ago, unlike the rest of us who weren't. So
yeah, and I wasn't 10 years ago. So yeah, well, Innovate UK wouldn't have existed 20 years ago. It would have existed as Technology Strategy Board 10 years ago. I think the challenges that companies face of trying to work out the connection between the technology they've got and whether they have customers who want it, I think those messages would have been exactly the same. And I can remember in the days of, I mean, those of you who are around in the 1980s would have been reading Tom Peters and Thriving on Chaos and Research of Excellence and all those great novels and the skunk works concepts. And I myself led 2 or 3 different skunk work types businesses, sort of on small 6 of us on the satellite of a multinational, given a budget and told to start a company and see how we got on with it. So okay, it's not exactly like the SMEs we've been talking about here, because there's a sort of pocket behind you. But I think some of those messages would have been the same. I think the landscape has generally changed. The UK chemical industry has completely changed in terms of its structures, the big players. The ICI is gone, Courtaulds are gone. We've got companies like Ineos and Axo Nobel much more present in the UK now than they were. So the landscape has changed quite significantly. I think the core problems are the same. The ecosystem is different. I think the culture in universities will be quite different. So I think the idea that it's a really good idea to do spin outs, that it's a really good idea to sort of connect the collaborations between companies and universities. I think the culture for that is much better than it used to be. I mean, what was it? Graham Richards probably did the first ever spin out of Oxford University. That was only in the late 80s. He wrote a great book about it. Oxford Molecular, that was using computing power to help design molecules. So, and Steve Davis with his organometallics out of Oxford as well. But they were probably some of the early companies in the 80s who did that, took them through to IPO and so on and so forth. I think the other thing that that has perhaps changed is the wider societal landscape in terms of the requirement for responsible innovation and the connection between companies. And today, people talk a lot more about global issues, about issues of ecosystem, about issues of biodiversity, about systems of pollution, and about climate change than I remember people, certainly in the business landscape, in the 1980s. I mean, of course, you tried to be responsible and, you worked under the Environment Agency with your IPPC permits and all those sorts of good things. But I don't think we weren't quite so focused as an industry on the broader impact on the planet of what we do, and of the benefits that we can bring through the technologies that sit within our companies and our universities. So off the top of my head, that might not be a very good answer, but so I think some things are the same and some things have changed. It's a bit trite, but anyway, I think that's the case.
I think it's a very good answer, Paul, and I think the critical point here is about the change in the landscape and the way in which we do innovation, because when we were doing chemistry innovation a generation ago, we were doing it within companies where the funding and the linkages were made by that internal organization. Whereas now the emphasis has very much shifted to innovation in SMEs, where it's the wider ecosystem which is needing to provide that support for innovation through the value chain, rather than the company itself doing it internally. So I think that is a big change in the landscape, and it just requires a very different sort of public and private set of support mechanisms to actually make that kind of SME-driven innovation actually happen. So I think that's a critical element of this whole area. Just put another way, I think if you were trying to drive a chemistry deep tech SME 20 years ago, the ecosystem was much less supportive than it currently is now. So I think we've made substantial progress over the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, Paul mentioned EDGE, but things like iCure as well. And a lot of the sort of development that we've seen in terms of sort of angel funding and early stage investing, I think have been critical, but there's still some way to go, I guess.
Thank you very much, Paul and Steve, for your answer. Actually, Ryan, that was a very good question. And in fact, I was at the RSC 10 and 20 years ago, and I've got colleagues in the room who absolutely worked in this area, and it's probably a good follow-up question. And I think it's absolutely right. The opportunities to be more connected, but also recognition of deep tech SMEs, I think that's where the change has really happened, certainly in the last 10 years. 20 years ago, there were initiatives put in place to support that academia industry connectivity. But I think that the opportunities now are so much greater. So I think there's a lot more that could be discussed around that. So thank you very much, Ryan. I'm going to come back to Tanya now for an online question.
Thanks, Helen. So we have a question from Chris Kay, who is director at Interface Polymers, and is asking a question as a deep tech founder who's found it impossible to find the specialist scale-up capital and expertise required in the UK. And his question is, given the challenges that Paul highlighted regarding the diverse needs of different chemical equipment and facilities, what recommendations does the report have to make specialist scale-up facilities more available or accessible to SMEs? That feels like one for Steve, but I should also just give a quick spoiler on our 5-point plan and say that working with others to make it easier for deep tech chemistry SMEs to find the premises and equipment they need to grow and thrive is one of the 5 points in that.
I think you've answered the question, Tanya, rather well, really. I mean, we highlighted a challenge in this area particularly. And I think that there's some uncertainty about quite what the necessary solution is. And Joe and Giovanni kind of referred to this a little bit before about whether it's actually a lack of facilities actually out there, or whether it's just a signposting issue or making better use of existing facilities. And I'm not quite sure which of those it is, and indeed it might be different in different parts of the UK, I suspect. So I'm not sure where our question is located, but that may also be part of the uncertainty. Certainly, in terms of physics, deep tech at the moment, the challenges in terms of facilities are very much greater in Yorkshire and the northeast of England than they are reporting elsewhere in the UK, or indeed in Ireland. And so there is clearly a geographical difference. I mean, those are physics companies rather than chemistry companies, but I imagine there are similar discrepancies across the UK in terms of chemistry facilities. But we haven't done that mapping. but it might be useful.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to come to Paul.
Thank you. Yes, my recommendation in the first instance will be to talk to the knowledge transfer network, because they might have a sense of who's got what facilities where. So this isn't as good as having the complete list in the fullness of time. I don't know if CPI might have something. It really depends what you're looking for. But I reckon there's a chicken and egg between putting £10 million of capital on the ground to put a pilot plant in to make things at 5, 10, 20 kilo scale versus being able to do it at 100 grams at a time, and how long you're going to have to do that for before you've got enough to then take it down the supply chain and get things approved. So I think there is a real chicken and egg there, and I don't know what the answer is, and I suspect that it depends very much on what sort of facilities you're looking for, what kind of, is it a synthesis facility you need, or is it an emulsifying testing type, if it's interfacial agents for making stable emulsions or something, or composites and continuous matrix, that sort of interfacial agent. I'm not sure what it is, but so yeah, depending on what it is, but I would imagine that the knowledge transfer network would be worth a conversation.
Very much, Paul. And Steve has just highlighted the importance of that scale-up capital.
Yes, I wondered whether Joe or Giovanni wanted actually to say something about that, because they're much more expert on this particular thing than I am, actually.
Joe, did you want to come in?
I think, in the summary report there were some comments about the choices for companies to scale up, how much to do internally and how much to outsource, and that's always a really pertinent question for our companies. And I think again, dwelling on the sort of progress in the last few decades, that the facilities that are available through CPI and the catapults and various other Henry Royce Institute, sort of different academic industrial collaborations with SMEs, that there is a lot going for it, but absolutely it's the signposting problem. But then it's sort of with the right business model and understanding a really workable plan for scale up and manufacture. There is funding available, but it requires sort of the expertise to really understand that long-term plan to scale up and manufacture, which sort of requires skills and experience and network.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to the room now and ask if there's any further questions.
Hi, yeah, Sarah Newman from EPSRC. Really interesting meeting. Very interesting to hear all the work of the report. Possibly a slightly unfair question. I'm quite interested in how this ecosystem in the UK is different or similar to the international picture, whether there are particular strengths that we have in the UK or things that we can learn from overseas.
Thank you very much. Steve, can I ask you to?
Yeah, I mean, one could talk about this for hours, I think. And I do have a research paper on this on our website. So it's called Learning from the Best. You can find it on the ERC website, so that's the plug. But there's a couple of things that I think are notable in terms of innovative SMEs. The Italians have a particular legal status of an innovative SME, which entitles those SMEs that are called innovative, and it involves employing PhDs and investing in R&D, that kind of thing. They have certain sort of legal breaks that they get in Italy. So we don't have anything like that status in the UK. It might be an interesting thing to look at. The Koreans have some really quite interesting ways of supporting innovation in different companies through different funding mechanisms. It's quite an interesting kind of thing. So there are some situations like that. And then, of course, you get into things like the very different way that the German and the French university systems actually regard high-tech and spin-out companies. There they are seen as the university takes no stake. The universities just see it as their business to promote these companies for the national good. Whereas here, the universities tend to take an equity share, and it's seen as potentially a source of income for UK universities. So it's a bit of there are some quite profound ecosystem differences. but they are rather at the sort of, they are rather buried in the detail, and you do need to look at them at that sort of level.
Thank you very much, Steve. I'm going to ask our other panelists if they have any experience of the international context of support for SMEs. Can I go to Giovanna first, and I'll come to you, Paul?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, of course, being Italian, I can comment also on what Steve was saying. It is true that there is this legal status of innovative SME. However, I still believe that the UK system is better because you know, it is supportive to the SMEs in making it easier. You know, the Italian system is very complicated. You know, we are working with an Italian investor at the moment, and as a point for the investment, I had to open a subsidiary in Italy, and it's been a nightmare. So overall, I still think that the system here is easier. I worked in Singapore for a while, where I was working at the Technology Transfer Office of the National University of Singapore. And already at the time, this was before I joined NaturalBits, already at the time, I was trying to work on the creation of, let's say, like a laboratory space that could be rented by startup, because I had identified the lack of space to create minimum viable products, or, you know, like a bench where the companies could tinker a bit before creating their own startup. This was 4 or 5 years ago, when I came to the UK, and, you know, here in Bath, close to Bath in Bristol, there is Unit DX, which is very well organized. So I realized that Unit DX was actually doing what I was trying to do in Singapore. So again, because in Singapore, there is a big ecosystem, but it's mainly based on fintech and other, you know, IT startups. I'm not sure in which other countries there is the support for deep tech startup that is what we are discussing here in this panel. Is a common challenge, I think.
Thank you, Giovanna. Can I just come back to Paul?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, they're great comments. I'm glad you went first. So a few things really. I mean, I think when we were setting up the Catapult network, we had to design. So following Herman Hauser's report, we had to decide in what areas we should have catapults and what they should do. I mean, at the level of how do you contract something in detail, and who should own it, and what would the legal structure be, and how would it get paid for, and things within the law, within the overarching vision of what Herman put out. So we spent a certain amount of time with the Fraunhofer people in Germany, and I visited them in Stuttgart and had a look around a couple of areas with some colleagues. And Dame Wendy Hall was at Southampton. She came around as well, looking at that. And so one of the things that the UK is not so good at as some other countries is this sense of longevity. So the Fraunhofer Institutes were set up, you know, I think funded by the Marshall Plan initially, but in the 1950s. And I think they've shut 2, and there's about 60 of them. So they have managed for, you know, close on 70 years to maintain these technology innovation centers. And in the, you know, in that same intermediate period, centers have come in and out of fashion in the UK, and we've had them, and then we've sold them off, privatized them, and then we've rebuilt them again, and all those sorts of things. So it would be really good to see the Catapult centers still in existence in 2080, because that's where we'd need to be comparable to the Germans in terms of taking a long-term view on some of our centers infrastructure. And I don't know if we've got a 70-year capacity to sustain something in the UK for that length of time. I guess, you know, the Royal Society has been going for 350 years and Oxford University for 800. So we can keep things going for a long time, but we don't always do it on the public sector side necessarily. I think that's one thing where we're weak. Where we're strong, access to equity, we're very strong, you know, particularly in AI. I mean, we're something like 2/3 of all investment in AI high-tech companies in Europe or in the UK, something like that. It's more than France and Germany combined. I think in SBRI, so under the PCP framework, pre-precursional framework, we're very strong relative to European countries, arguably less good than they are in the States in SBIR, but we're still, I think, pretty good at that. One of the reasons that we built the catapults to a different design template than the Fraunhofer Institutes is that it is so easy if you're a UK company to work with your local universities, much easier than it is if you're a German company wanting to work with your local universities. And that's one of the reasons the Fraunhofers have a different model from the catapults. They're fixing a problem that we don't need to fix in the UK. And a nice example of that would be KTPs, where we've got 800 KTP associates at the moment employed by UK universities and working in UK firms doing knowledge transfer. And I think one other thing I'd say where the UK is very good, and the US would say this, certainly in some areas, is our capacity to play nicely as teams across organizational boundaries. So, for example, the Quantum Technologies program, which we built together with EPSRC, Innovate UK was then Technology Strategy Board, National Physical Laboratory, DSTL. And so we created a national program in quantum technologies. And I can remember a conversation with an American counterpart who said they couldn't even get the three forces within the US Defense Department to work together on something like quantum. And we were doing it across multiple institutions, metrology labs and defense people and civilian science funding and so on and so forth. So, and we've done the same thing in things like synthetic biology. So I think our capacity to play nicely between our institutions, chemistry innovation was established as a partnership. That's the original KTN in chemistry, as a partnership between the Society of Chemical Industries and the Royal Society of Chemistry and the CIA. So 3 chemistry bodies coming together with us to help set up a network to support chemistry across boundaries. So we're very good at that in the UK. And I think, other countries are good too, but I think, the feedback I've had from overseas is that we're quite uniquely strong at that.
Great, thank you very much, Paul. Now, I think we have time probably for just 2 more questions if we can have quick responses from our panel. So I'm going to take 2 online. If there are any more in the room, then we're very happy to answer those at the end of the afternoon session. So I'm going to come to Tanya for the 2 remaining online.
So the first of those is around access to existing industry facilities such as labs, and whether that could be extended to access to large firms' expertise, such as management and networking training and experience of routes to market.
I think there are frameworks for this. Strength in Places, I'm involved in a nanophotonics project around that, and that is Seagate working with a whole bunch of SMEs to share technologies. So it does happen.
Thank you, Steve. And quick response from Paul.
Yeah, I think that there is something about the primes and the large corporates as customers that can pull through innovations from SMEs. The defense community are very active in that space through DSTL and through DASA, where they're trying to find organizations, SMEs, who have mainly civilian technologies or products and looking at how they can be used to help make our defensive capacities stronger and more robust. And they definitely have active programs to connect them into the defense primes, so the Leonardos, Airbuses, Da Vinci's, those sort of Da Vinci's, what am I talking about? But Thales, those sorts of people. So that's very strong, and I think that also exists with quite a lot of corporates who look outside for their technology. So the likes of GSK and AstraZeneca will be looking for discovery, drug discovery from SMEs, that new model that Steve referred to earlier. So I think that pulling through from corporates can be quite important, and the corporate venturing community, are quite often looking for investments in companies aligned to their strategic intent, their strategic purpose. So people like Unilever, for example, have quite active programs in that area, or they certainly used to. I haven't talked to them recently. So I think there are opportunities. And anybody who invests in you as well as money, you get management expertise and help and the seat on the board, and those add a lot of value to growing companies in our experience.
Thank you very much, Paul. I'll come back to Tanya for a final online question.
Final one is, what are the main challenges around accessing, retaining and nurturing skills and talent?
I'm going to come to Giovanna to share your own experience on that one.
Yes, it is indeed a challenge because, at the moment, I think the market is more on the side of the employees than the employers. we find that finding good chemists or engineers is more challenging than it was a couple of years ago. So we offer a very nice environment and actually also quite good salaries, but it is a challenging market, and I don't have a specific suggestion on how to retain them. We had some very good interns that we had thanks to Royal Society of Chemistry grants. They all moved on. We have a core team that is very strong, but unfortunately also good employees come and go because there are a lot of opportunities for them at the moment.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. And I think that may be one of the things that we need to really think about in our own solutions coming out of this report. Thank you. Now, I will just give one opportunity to those in the room, just if there is any final questions.
Hi, my name is Robert Parker. When we were lobbying the government at CSR times, we used to say, if you invest £1 in chemistry, you'd get 20 odd pounds back or something in a few years' time. Perhaps it's too soon to know the effect of these deep tech SMEs on the economy, but perhaps if we could, then should we be lobbying the government to give some incentives for bigger companies to help them out with the sort of facilities that they need and that sort of thing?
Thank you very much, Robert. I wonder if Joe might want to just give a quick response to that one.
Yeah, I'd start by saying absolutely, money invested in the sector returns very strongly with financial multiples, but for government's consideration, it certainly also returns in impact, positive impact to the environment and to medicines and to all sorts of other sort of seriously important parts of life. So yes, that impact and return should definitely be highlighted. And government does invest in any number of ways, British Business Bank, Innovate UK, all sorts of things. But yeah, maybe doing so. And I suppose the question sort of mentioned lobbying companies to, or the government should support companies to sort of support the sector as well. And it's important, I suppose, to lobby government to really be engaging in good dialogue across the industry to make sure that their interventions are really the most strategically important ones. And it's all about connecting all the different parts of the ecosystem together, because yeah, it's very multifaceted, but the SMEs really need support along every step of their journey, and that sort of involves a huge number of partners and ways for government to support them along the way as well.
Thank you, Joe. And just to finish off on that particular question, I'm going to hand back to Tanya.
I think a major message from the report is, as much as anything, about the social and environmental contribution that all these wonderful SMEs like Nature Beads and lots of others that were interviewed are making. So it's that very mission-driven piece that Steve was talking about, the way that they are enabling new diagnostics, technologies and tools that will improve our health and well-being, contributing to energy and environmental technologies and to solving a range of environmental challenges from net zero to plastics and others. And I think that is at least as important, probably even more so when it comes to the findings than economic messages.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And just say thank you so much to the panel for answering all those questions, and thank you to the audiences, both online and in the room, who have asked the questions. If there are any further questions, we can pick those up after the event. and we'll ask the panellists to come back if there's any broad answers that we can give. So thank you very much for your engagement in that part of our event. So before we get to the end of the event, I just want to say that, of course, this is only the start of the conversation. This is about working in partnership across all of the opportunities across deep tech chemistry and how they can fill their scientific and market potential. And with that in mind, the RSC have set out our own 5-step action plan. And I'm going to hand back to Tanya, who is going to talk through those 5 steps so you can hear the actions that we will put in place. So Tanya.
Thank you, Helen. So essentially, the steps we are going to take are that as a powerful voice for chemistry, we want to work with policymakers and other key players in the innovation ecosystem to champion the role of all these marvellous deep tech chemistry SMEs and the way that they are tackling the most pressing societal and environmental challenges we face, to establish and support peer-to-peer networks, to promote leadership skills, growth and innovation, to enable connections with investors to improve access to capital, to enable funders to support and to provide support and processes meeting the needs of deep tech chemistry SMEs, and to make it easier for deep tech chemistry SMEs to find the premises and the equipment they need to grow and thrive.
Thank you very much, Tanya. And just as a reminder, the full report, the recommendations and all the background research is available in the reports on our website. So please take the opportunity to take a look at those. And again, if there are any further questions, we'll be very happy to address those. So I'm just going to come back to my panel members just for any final thoughts that you would like to share with our audiences this afternoon. So I'm going to start with Giovanni, if there's just 1 or 2 words you want to say at the end.
Yes, there was another point that I wanted to make before that I forgot, because something was mentioned by Steve about networking. At a Royal Society of Chemistry networking event, I think it was back in 2018, I was introduced to another member, and this person, I think I can make his name, is Alex Rape from Oxford Nanosystem. He's been very helpful, so I fully support the idea of, having more networking event, because we were discussing about accessing support from more than training to how to manage a company, more support by mentors, people who are slightly ahead of us in the journey of entrepreneurship that can be very helpful, and Alex has been very helpful, and I hope again to be helpful to somebody else who's starting the journey right now.
Thank you very much. Paul, your final words.
Thank you. Well, it's been a really great hour and a quarter, so thank you very much for the invitation. I think this is such an important thing that we get right for our nation, but also for the planet, to the broader points that have been made throughout this. So, I just would say that, to RSC, would be very pleased to work with you as you implement your 5-point plan. And we'd be really happy to support any companies in the sector through our processes, of grants or loans or catapults or networks through KTN, and to try and access to finance companies or equity through investor partnerships. So the importance of the sector is not lost on us. We're absolutely up for doing that, and you'll know the stuff we've been doing in plastics packaging and electric vehicles, Faraday and foundation industries and those things. So that kind of the importance of that will continue in our organization going forward. So please do reach out for us, and where we can help, let us know, and we'll see what we can do.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. And I'm going to finally on screen, I'm going to go to Jo.
Thanks very much. I think in conclusion for me, it's sort of been a reminder that there has been progress in these regards over the last number of years, and actually the UK is in a strong position. We do have a thriving SME community. The number of SMEs sort of being founded and initiated is large, and the successes have been good, but we need to absolutely be looking very, very carefully at how we can support them further, and not become complacent, and also to make sure we do lobby government not to remove some of the support that has already been in place, and that we don't move back. And also, I think, to be cognizant that the successes that we've had have been partly due to sort of our openness and internationalization. And even in the panel today, obviously, we're not all from the UK, and many of the SMEs are involved in people from all over the world. And actually, we need to sort of make sure that everything we build in the UK and the support networks that we build are very much in that global perspective, understanding how they fit into the wider global ecosystem as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. And I'm going to finish with coming to Steve.
Just a thank you to me for those in the RSC who very strongly supported us through this study, for the companies and other people who participated in all of the workshops and answered all of our difficult questions. So thank you very much for that. It seems to me that with the innovation strategy, the government's focus is very much on trying to stimulate innovation to address the grand challenges. The deep tech firms have a critical part to play in that. So I think there's an opportunity at the moment with the 5-point plan from the RSC, working with partners to deliver a better ecosystem to support success and innovation in these companies.
Thank you very much, Steve. So as we finish, I just want to say another very big thank you to the panelists, to Steve, to Paul, to Joe, and to Giovanna. Thank you also to my colleagues in the room with me today. So thank you to Tanya and the team for their work on this, and also to Aurora and her team. And also thank you so much to all of you who have joined us in Burlington House, and all of those who have joined us online. And just remember, the takeaway from this is, as Paul said, chemistry will save the world. So please work with us, share your insights, share your thoughts. Please do think about the innovation. Please hold the RSC to account for the 5-point action plan that we've pulled together, and please do read the report. There is some very important research, and we need to continue with that, and we need to look at the evidence, and we need to support our deep tech SMEs for all the phenomenal work that they do in making global challenges and being able to address them. So thank you very much. For those of you who are based in Burlington House, you can stay with us for some networking and coffee. For those of you who joined us online, thank you so much. We do hope that you'll be able to join us for future events, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. So thank you.